Hi, this is Lisa. In this video, I'm going to discuss with you how to graph an equation on the calculator. This is all in your notes, so you shouldn't have to copy this down. Go to the y equals screen on the calculator. So if you get your calculator out, the y equals screen is right here. Let's see if I can write on this. And type your equation in. Your equation must be in the form y equals. Hit the graph key on the calculator. Graph key is over here on the right-hand side to graph the equation. You may need to hit zoom, and zoom is in that row on the calculator as well. Zoom is right there. And option 6, and that will get you to the standard viewing window. Standard viewing window goes from an x minimum to an x maximum. So smallest x value on the left-hand side of the calculator will be -10. X max, or on the right-hand side of the calculator, the biggest x value will be +10. It also goes from a y minimum, or the lowest point on your calculator, of -10 to a y maximum, or the highest value on your calculator will be at +10. That's our standard viewing window. And most of the functions that we're going to graph in this class will fit in that standard viewing window. Second graph will help you fill in a table of values for your equation. So second graph, second and then graph on your calculator will give you a table. But before we can do that, we need to set up the table. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to do second, and then on the window key, if you notice here in blue, it says table set. So what we're going to do for our functions, and you can change this in different classes. For ours, we're going to start the table at 0. So the smallest x value it'll show on your table is 0. We're going to do delta, or increments, of 1 unit. Our independent variable, or x, is going to pop up automatically, and our dependent variable, or y, is also going to pop up automatically. Let me just take a little picture of this and put this in my file. Okay, so that's how your table functions should be set up. And then we're going to go to table. So if you do second graph again, it will pull up a table of values. You'll need to enter x values only if you had that on ask for the independent variable. So, and in MyLabs Plus, when you graph, you're going to need to select the correct shape to graph and use points from your table to graph an equation. So we're going to do a few examples next. Example number 1 says we're going to graph x plus y equals 5. Now I can do this by hand if I choose values to plug in for x and y. For example, I can plug 0 in for x, I can plug 1 in for x, and I can find the corresponding y values. Now I know that this is a linear equation. I know it's linear because x and y are not in the denominator. There are no exponents on x or y. X and y are not in an absolute value sign. And x and y are not in a radical, or a square root, or a cube root. But I'm going to show you how to do this on the calculator. So I'm going to pull the calculator back up. And I'm going to do, if you do second and then mode, so second and then the key right next to it, it'll quit you out of that screen. and I can go to my y equals screen. Now notice in y equals, if you have something there, hit right under your arrow keys, hit the clear key to get rid of that. But notice it has to be in y equals format. It will allow you to enter multiple different equations in, but I have to solve my equation for y. X plus y equals 5. If I subtract x from both sides, then I will have y equals 5 minus x. Now it's in this y equals format. I can type the rest of that into my calculator. One last thing I'm going to have you check right now is if you hit that mode key, don't hit the second key, just the mode key. And we want everything to be highlighted on this left-hand side of the screen. We want normal mode, not scientific or engineering form, etc. So mine happens to not be on real mode. I'm going to arrow down and hit enter so that, whoops, I went too far. Hit enter so that everything along, all the options are along the right hand side of the screen, and then we're going to hit second mode or quit. And then I'm going to go to my y equals screen. Now I'm going to type 5 minus x. So 5 minus, and the x key, there's kind of a shortcut key here right next to your alpha key. It says xt theta n. If you're in the correct mode and you hit that, you should get an x. And then we're going to hit graph. Now I'm not in my standard viewing window here. If I want to do that, I'm going to hit zoom. And option number 6 here is zoom standard. So I'm going to hit number 6. And it will make it go from -10 to 10 units in the x direction, -10 to 10 units in the y direction. So that's what my line should look like. I'm going to put that over here. We can look at that later. Okay, the other thing we're going to do is we're going to go get that table. So second and then the graph key will give us a table. We told it to start at 0 and do increments of 1 unit. So I have x is 0, x is 1, x is 2. Now if I needed different values, I can scroll up or down with the arrow keys to get different values to come into play there. Okay, but 0 and 1 will work very nicely for us right now. I'm going to drag that back into my screen so you can see those values. And what we need in MyLabs Plus, you need 2 points to graph a line. So I'm going to graph this line here for you. I'm going to do that by hand. And I'm just going to pick 2 of these values to use. Okay, so I have -1,6 and 0,5. Those are the 2 points I'm going to plot. Or actually, those aren't going to work very well because my grid is not that big. I need smaller values. So let's plot 2, 3, and 3, 2. 2, 3, and 3, 2. So x is 2, y is 3. X is 3, y is 2. So there are my 2 points. If I'm doing this by hand, I need those 2 points. And then I just draw a line through those 2 points. And there's the graph of my line. Now, in this next example, we have an exponent here. If your exponent is 2, if you have x squared in your equation, it's what we call quadratic. When you graph it, the shape is called a parabola, and a parabola looks kind of like a U, so it's U-shaped. And in order to graph a parabola in MyLabs Plus, we need 3 points. So I'm actually going to go to MyLabs Plus and I'm going to pull up a problem to look at. So what I'm going to do in this problem, here's one that I pulled from MyLabs Plus, and I'll just show you what that looks like on the screen. It says graph this quadratic equation. It gives us a set of axes and it gives us our graphing tools here. So I'm going to not do the one that's actually typed in the workbook. I'm not going to do this one. I am going to graph this equation because I want to show you how it's done in MyLabs Plus. So what we need to do is use our calculator again, and I'm going to go back to my y equals screen. I'm going to hit clear, and I'm going to type x squared. So x, and then there's a square key down here along the left-hand side. Down under that second, I can do x squared. And if your calculator is still in the exponent, you may have to hit the right arrow key to get it out of the exponent and hit +1. So make sure that that +1 is not up there by the 2. Okay, make sure you've gotten it out of your exponent mode. I can hit graph, and it will show me what my graph should look like. It should be that U shape. And if I do second graph, it's going to give me a table of values. Now, when you're graphing a parabola, you must have the vertex or the lowest point, okay, the smallest y value. If it's a U shape that opens up, the x squared term is positive, you have to have the lowest y value. So when I look at this table of values, it's kind of nice because I can see where my lowest y value is. So the points that I need to graph the parabola, since I need 3 points, I'm going to choose that lowest y value. I'm going to use those 3 points right there. So I'm going to do -1, 2, 0, 1, and 1, 2. And I'm going to go back to my Labs Plus to do that so you can see what that looks like. Actually, let me do it by hand first. If we do 0, 1, -1, 2, and +1, 2, I should get a U shape that looks something like that. Okay, we're going to go to My Labs Plus now, and I'm going to graph this. If you hit the little magnifying glass up in the upper right hand corner, it'll blow your screen up, and there is a shape here for a parabola. So we're going to go ahead and graph that. Okay, so first thing we're going to do, we're going to select our parabola tool, and we're going to do those 3 points in order. We're going to do the one that was on the left, -1, 2, then we're going to do the vertex, 0, 1, and then we're going to do the point that was on the right of the vertex, 1, 2. So there's -1, 2, there is 0, 1, and notice when I come up to that third point, now it creates that U shape. So those were those 3 points that I chose to graph by hand. I'm going to hit the Save button down at the bottom of that blue screen, and then I'm going to check my answer. And it likes that answer. So be careful when you're graphing. You need a point to the left of the vertex, and a point to the right of the vertex. And our last problem for this video is how to graph an absolute value equation. Okay, so again, I'm going to pull this up on the calculator, but I've got a note here for you that in My Labs Plus you need 2 points to graph an equation with an absolute value sign. So again, we're going to use the vertex, and we're going to use one other point. Absolute value equations are symmetric, so it's always going to make a nice V shape. So you just have to have the lowest point and one other point to tell it how to graph. So let's pull it up on the calculator first. If I go to my y equals screen, I'm going to clear out my previous equation. To find absolute value, you're going to hit the math key. You're going to hit the right arrow key so that it says num up top, and the first option says ABS. So we're just going to hit enter, and we want the absolute value of x plus 3. Now, depending on your operating system here, it may just say ABS with parentheses around it. You want to make sure that your x plus 3 is either in between your absolute value signs, these vertical lines here, or that it's inside the parentheses. And if I want to type something after that, see how it's telling me right arrow key? Right arrow key will get me out. So if I had to do something else in addition to that, that's how I would do that. I'm going to graph it just so that we can see the shape. It is a V shape. And then I'm going to do second graph so I can get my table of values. And again, I'm looking for that lowest Y value. So these look like they're decreasing as I'm going up. I'm going to hit up again until I find the lowest Y value. Okay, so once I have that lowest Y value and a couple of values around it, those are the points that I'm going to need to use to graph. So my lowest Y value looks to be at 0. I am going to use that point and one other point. Those are the 2 points I'm going to use to graph. -3, 0 and -2, 1. So by hand, I would do -3, 0, so -3 and then not up or down, and -2, 1. If I'm doing this by hand, I am going to pick a third point though, and by hand I'm going to do that -4, 1, because that's going to help me draw that V shape that I know I should have. When you're doing it in MyLabs Plus, you only need -3, 0 and -2, 1. So let's go back to MyLabs Plus. Let me pull up one that has an absolute value, and it's not exactly the same absolute value equation, but let me just show you. To graph the one that we just did, I'm going to graph at, what did we say, -3, 0 and -2, 1, and notice how that gives me a nice V. I've got to have the lowest point, that's what it does first, and then one other point tells it where to put that V. If you get it in the wrong spot, you can always hold down and move your point around, but that's what our V should look like. So that's what it looks like when you graph that in MyLabs Plus. And that concludes this video. Have a great day, everyone.